So we were just sort of talking a little bit about the importance of history. You've had a very long career teaching American history. You're the director of the World War II Era Studies Institute. So you would say this stuff is pretty important to you, as it is to me. When it comes to World War II, why do you think it is so important to study and remember World War II?
Jake, most important is the fact that you come to understand by studying World War II and its impact, you come to understand why we live in the world we live in today. And that's the important fact about coming to understand World War II and what happened, where it happened. But, Jake, most importantly, why did it happen? And by understanding why, you come to understand then further the impact of various battles, the impact of various conferences, and the impact of, say, our nation's dedication to overcoming the Axis forces in cooperation with the Allies, meaning Britain, France, and China, and so forth. Because, Jake, if indeed we did not join World War II when we did, uh, the Allies would have lost. It would have been a total different world in which we live in today if indeed we did not join the Allies. And Jake, what caused us to join the Allies? Well, think about it. Prior to Pearl Harbor, you had an American public that were 90% against us getting involved in the war in Europe that was unfolding and the war in Asia that was unfolding. But then look at what happens on December 7th, 1941. That impact of that attack on the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor brings about a major change in the attitude of the American public. And FDR, our president, was able to bring about the next day a declaration of war on Japan. Now, with that declaration of war, it could have remained just as that, us going to war against one Axis nation, meaning Japan. But because Japan belonged to that Axis group, meaning Germany and Italy, what comes about on December 9th and December 10th, Nazi Germany declares war on us and Fascist Italy declares war on us. Therefore, FDR on December 11th then gets Congress to declare war on both Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. With this being the case, we are now involved in truly a world war. War that's not only unfolding within the European continent, but also on the Asian continent. And then in turn thereafter, also on the African continent. That's the reason why it is known as World War II.
There's a lot of very interesting threads to pull on there, and we definitely will get into all those aspects. But you set the stage nicely, and this is something I want to flesh out a little bit. So once full scale global war breaks out, the United States is involved. It's the Allied powers pitted against the Axis powers. What were the stakes of the war? What was on the line in terms of the future of the world?
All right, if indeed we did not become involved, Nazi Germany more or less likely would have been very, very successful in not just overcoming and taking into control Western Europe, but also a great deal of Eastern Europe. And the war in Europe, well, in a sense, it could be unfolding like Russia versus the Ukrainian forces today. But with what Germany wanted to do was, yes, eliminate the communists within the USSR. And they could have done just that if indeed we did not get involved when we did after Pearl Harbor and come to the complete support of Joseph Stalin, his government, and his forces. And because we do become to their complete support, supplying them continuously throughout 41, 42, and beyond. If we hadn't, Jake, what could have happened is Germany could have taken over all of a great part of Eastern Europe. And then in turn, Hitler would have been very, very proud in establishing what he called the Greater Third Reich. Now, while he's doing that, what's Fascist Italy doing? They're moving throughout northern Africa, basically utilizing their forces in Libya, which was a Italian colony at that time, to move against the British and move against the French throughout northern Africa with the idea of taking over that entire territory and then declaring really the Mediterranean Sea an Italian lake. And that was Benito Mussolini's goal. And indeed, if indeed we did not get involved in supplying the British and the French the way we did, particularly after Pearl Harbor, it could have been that those key nations would have lost their battles in North Africa and Fascist Italy would have taken over that region. And then in the end, talking about well, Imperial Japan, its goal was to establish what was known as the Greater East Asia Pro-Prosperity Sphere. That was a sphere that included all of, for the most part, Eastern China, all throughout Southeast Asia, down including north of Australia, and then in turn moving through the Central Pacific, and including such islands like the Marianas, the Marshalls, the Gilberts. And within that sector is also the key state that belonged to us, and that is the Philippines. They wanted to take over the Philippines. Now, once again, if we did not get involved, supply our allies the way we did, and us mobilizing, and Jake, keep in mind one thing, we didn't mobilize immediately. We were totally unprepared for this war. It took us from, in essence, December 7th, 1941 to August of 1942 to re-gear our military, supply it, and then in turn begin an offensive. But take a look at how long it took us to put the military together to begin the fight within the Pacific. And the fight in the Pacific was primarily our fight, not the British fight, not the French fight, but our fight. Because the British and the French, they were totally occupied with defending themselves and countering Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in Europe and Northern Africa. So key thing here is the involvement of the United States. Jake, it's what brings about the end of World War II and the world we live in today.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think it's such a strong case to make for American exceptionalism. But you're right. If the United States, this is how I think I see it playing out. If the United States doesn't get involved, you would probably have Britain be subjugated under Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany would have invaded the Soviet Union as they did. It would have been a massive conflict between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, in which the stakes, frankly, are the life and liberty of all of the freedom loving citizens of the European continent. I mean, can you imagine the people of Eastern Europe who are living under a communist regime and they're basically pitted between an evil fascist Nazi Germany and an evil communist empire? Can you imagine the outlook on life as you're pitted between those two regimes? But ultimately, maybe Nazi Germany wins, and then you have Nazi Germany and fascist Italy moving throughout Africa, the Middle East. You have Imperial Japan moving throughout Asia, and the entire Eurasian continent and African continent could have been subjugated under totalitarian rule if the United States never got involved.
Jake, that's how many historians see it. Again, if we did not get involved, and it's not that we wanted to, keep that in mind, please. Pearl Harbor brings about a massive change in American public opinion. And with that event taking place, we then therefore supported a government that then thereafter moved against, yes, the Greater Third Reich, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. And one thing that we also had to overcome was our resistance to supporting the communists underneath the USSR, but we had no choice but to do so because of the fact that it was that nation that also was involved with fighting the Axis forces. So we did eventually bring them about as an ally. Not initially, because we were definitely against the communists within our world at this time. Uh, but that all changes. Again, the impact of World War II.
Yeah. The communist alliance, the Soviet Union alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union is definitely quite an interesting alliance. And I would like to get into that a little bit later. But you talk about earlier, you mentioned it's important to understand why this happened. We were talking about the causes of World War II. And, I can't help but look in hindsight at what a blunder Pearl Harbor was on the part of Imperial Japan and then the declaration of war by Germany. But let's talk about America's foreign policy leading up to December 7th, 1941. Would you classify the American foreign policy as isolationist?
It was isolationist, and the only thing that did associate ourselves with the war in Europe and the war in Asia was various agreements that we had with Britain, that we had with France, and also with various governments all throughout Southeast Asia in terms of supporting them with supplies. And we did so via shipments of cargo through cargo vessels. And Jake, in so many ways, look what's happening today in the Ukraine. Ukrainian forces would not be alive and performing as well as they are without us providing them key material, key weapons, key intelligence services, and of course we're also doing so in adjacent with various NATO forces.
And with Israel in the Middle East as well.
Oh yes, but it's interesting about what's unfolding in the Middle East. Uh, there doesn't seem to be at this particular time any real movement toward a long time peace. Basically, it's at the moment just a pause in the, uh, the the fighting that's taking place over there. And I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see it. But what I'd also like to see is the Israeli government getting together with the other nations in that area, as well as tribal representations, the Hussein and uh, the other tribal areas, and coming together and reaching an agreement for the sake of the people that live within that region. But I don't see that happening, Jake. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think peace in the Middle East is one of the greatest puzzles, uh, possibly in world history, and our American political leaders are gonna have to grapple with that. Hopefully, we're filming this on inauguration day. Trump was just inaugurated. Hopefully, he picks back up where he left off with the Abraham Accords, and possibly we can see peace with Israel and Saudi Arabia and Egypt.